Previously on Gears.
I worked for many, many years with Phil Wright. Now, it's very sad. He passed away. We found out the news late last night. We are unsure of the reasons for his death, unfortunately.
How old was he?
I think he must have been 50, just on 50, somewhere around
so
there.
He was young.
Very, very young, very young. But Phil had this incredible persona about him. He wasn't really a materialistic kind of person. He didn't really care about his appearance. And that's how radio should be. Because, it's not like now where you have to dress up and wear a shirt and all of that kind of stuff. But I used to work, when I started, for many, many years, I did 1 to 4 in the morning on 5FM. And Phil used to come in and do the show on the Sunday evening at 10 through until 1. And he used to play this most incredible rock music, and then he did a show together for one of the hours of the 3. He would do the Dinosaur Days with a guy called Leon Economides, which was an education all on its own. I mean, I picked up on music there, bands, people I'd never ever even heard of. It really was a great time of radio to listen to all of this heavy rock. And then also this very, very obscure kind of rock music from all over the world, besides, your England and Americas and that kind of stuff. And I remember, because Phil, in my opinion, had one of those voices that you could just listen to all day. He really had a magnificent radio voice, just a magnificent voice. And I'm sure if you watch Top Billing, you would have heard his voice in the background there. They still used him. I assume up until this day, unfortunately. But I remember sitting with Phil and saying to him, Phil, why don't you just go and become? Why don't you work harder and you could become like a daytime radio jockey? Because he could have done a breakfast show, a mid-morning, a lunchtime show, or he could have done an afternoon drive show. That's the kind of presence he had and the voice that he had on air. He just had that kind of voice where he just went, wow, I'm listening to something. He never strained. I learned so much from him just in terms of microphone technique and talking to your audience from Phil Wright, because as you saw him and as you heard him on the radio was exactly how he was all the time. He was just amazing. And I remember saying to him, Phil, but why don't you want to become like because I was very ambitious. I wanted to eventually get onto daytime radio. That was what I really wanted to do. And he could have just sat there and said, okay, I want a daytime show, and more than likely would have got it. And his words to me, which could be a little bit prophetic and could be a little bit ironic, we don't know the circumstances of his passing, but I will never ever forget, he sat there and he said, you know what, my uncle died at 34 years of age from stress. I never ever want to have stress in my life.
Wow.
And I'll never ever forget and I just sat there and I admired him for that kind of courage. And he was more into his rock music and his rock shows and going to go and see bands and be part of festivals, and that to him was living his life. And then on top of that, he had this I would call it peculiar, he would call it normal, obsession with reptiles and specifically snakes. He collected snakes. I don't know how many snakes he had, but he had a tremendous amount of snakes living in his property, living in some of them in tanks and some of them just roaming around.
Oh my word!
I promise you. So every Sunday night when I used to come in to do my show at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was always there by 11:30 to listen to the end of the Dinosaur Days, and then the last hour I'd sit and talk to Phil while he was playing his last hour, and we'd chat just about things and about the station and where we were going and music and that, because we shared those common interests. And he would always sit there and say, okay, coming up with Sasha after 1 is stuff. What was it? He'd just say coming up is stuff, because it was quite a busy kind of show. But he had such a love for animals specifically, but specifically snakes. He lost one of his dear friends to a snake bite where he worked for. Where Phil eventually worked for was the Transvaal Snake Park in Kyalami, in Midrand. And one of the guys who was there was unfortunately bitten by very venomous snake in the snake park, and unfortunately died. So I remember it affected him terribly.
That's terrible.
Very, very terrible. But he'll be really sorely missed, and I think those people who've had the privilege over the years to listen to how he presented a show, the music that he played, the enthusiasm with which he played that kind of music, will always have a very, very fond memory of number one, a really, really great guy. Number two, music knowledge par excellence, and number three, just somebody who just got on with life the way that he wanted to get on with it. So, to the big guy, the metalhead, Phil Wright, we really, really miss you, Phil, and wherever you are, may you be happy.
Weekdays from 12 to 2 p.m. Central African Time.
Beautiful.
Gears with Sasha Martinengo on bulls.co.za.